The crystal chandeliers in Valentino's restaurant scattered a golden shimmer across the pristine white tablecloths and the gleaming silverware, crafting an atmosphere of old-world elegance that practically shouted exclusivity. This was decidedly not a place where just anyone dined. The clientele was a carefully curated mix of politicians, powerful business tycoons, and those who operated just beyond the edges of legitimate society. Tonight, as on every Tuesday for the last 3 months, the corner booth stood reserved for a man whose very name could make even the most hardened criminals lower their voices in hushed reverence. Dante Moretti sat with his back strategically placed against the wall, a position that afforded him a sweeping view of the entire dining room. At 32, he was the unchallenged head of an empire forged on a foundation of unwavering loyalty, deeply instilled fear, and an iron fist that maintained an unbreakable grip on half the city's underground operations. His impeccably tailored black suit undoubtedly cost more than most people earned in a month, and the Patek Philippe watch adorning his wrist alone could have covered someone's rent for an entire year. His dark hair was slicked back with almost surgical precision, framing a neatly trimmed stubble beard that only enhanced his already formidable and dangerous appeal. But it was his eyes that truly commanded attention, eyes that could freeze a man's blood solid with a single piercing glance. Dante Moretti was power personified, an undeniable force of nature. "Mr. Moretti, your usual." The head waiter approached with practiced deference, his hands betraying his nervousness with a slight tremor, despite his best efforts to maintain his professional composure. Dante didn't even bother to look up from his phone. "You know what I want, Antonio?" "Of course, sir. Right away." Antonio beat a hasty retreat, a palpable sense of relief evident in his posture. Around the restaurant, conversations continued in hushed and muted tones, but every single person was acutely aware of the man occupying the corner booth. They had all heard the chilling stories, the urban legends whispered in the dead of night. Families who dared to cross the Morettis simply vanished from the city, erased as if they had never existed. Business owners who stubbornly refused protection found their establishments mysteriously burned to the ground, reduced to smouldering ruins overnight. Though nothing was ever officially proven, of course. Dante Moretti didn't need to raise his voice or issue direct threats. His reputation, carefully cultivated and ruthlessly enforced, did all the work for him. Sarah Mitchell pushed her way through the swinging kitchen doors, expertly balancing 3 heavy plates with the practiced ease of someone who had been waiting tables since she was just 18 years old. Now 25, she was meticulously saving every single penny towards her final year of nursing school, working relentless double shifts at Valentino's because the tips were significantly better than anywhere else in the city. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a tight, neat ponytail, and her red apron remained remarkably spotless despite the frenetic pace of the dinner rush. "Table 7 needs more wine," she told Marco, the sommelier, before turning towards the main dining room. "Sarah, wait!" Marco's voice held a distinct note of warning, but she was already gone, weaving between tables with an effortless grace. She had noticed that the corner booth was occupied again, the one that always seemed to draw the eye. The mysterious man who always sat alone, always ordered the exact same meal, and always left a tip that was almost ridiculously larger than the bill itself. Sarah had served him twice before, and on both occasions he had barely acknowledged her existence beyond a curt, almost dismissive nod. She didn't know who he was, and honestly, she didn't particularly care to know. In her world, people were just people, regardless of the size of their bank accounts or their perceived social status. "Here's your ossobuco, Mr. Moretti." Antonio placed the dish down with almost reverent care. Chef Michel prepared it personally. Dante's phone vibrated insistently, signaling an incoming text message from his consigliere regarding a shipment issue down at the docks. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he quickly scanned the details. Someone was brazenly stealing from him. Someone was foolish enough to skim off the top, and even more foolishly thought he wouldn't notice. He stabbed at the veal with more force than was strictly necessary, his mind already racing, calculating the best way to handle the situation. The Moretti family did not tolerate theft in any form. They dealt with problems permanently, swiftly, and decisively. Sarah was approaching table 12 with their entrees when she overheard raised voices coming from the corner. She turned to see the man in the ridiculously expensive suit glaring down at his plate, his expression thunderous and radiating displeasure. "This is unacceptable." Dante's voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent restaurant, cutting through the previously bustling atmosphere like a knife. "I specifically asked for the meat medium rare. This is practically raw." Antonio rushed over, his face now visibly pale with anxiety. "Mr. Moretti, I apologize profusely. I'll have Chef Michel." "I don't care what Michel does." Dante pushed the plate away with a visible air of disgust. "This is incompetence." Pure incompetence. The entire restaurant had stopped eating, conversations dying in mid-sentence. Waiters froze mid-step, trays held precariously in the air. Even the piano player's hands hovered hesitantly over the keys, unsure whether to continue. Sarah watched the unfolding scene, her jaw tightening with rising indignation. She had seen the plate when Antonio had carried it out of the kitchen. The meat had been cooked perfectly, exactly as requested. She'd stake her entire reputation on it. This wasn't about the food, she realized. This was about a man who was accustomed to everyone cowering at his feet, unquestioningly obeying his every whim. Before she could consciously stop herself, Sarah found herself walking purposefully toward the corner booth, her bright red apron a stark contrast against the muted, sophisticated decor of the restaurant. "Sarah, no!" Antonio's whispered warning went completely unheeded. She stopped beside Dante's table, her clear blue eyes meeting his dark, intense ones, without even a trace of fear. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had initially thought, with a face that could have been undeniably handsome, if not for the chilling coldness and barely concealed cruelty etched into his expression. A thick gold chain glinted at his open collar, and she noticed a subtle tattoo on his wrist, some kind of family crest or symbol of power. "Is there a problem, sir?" Her voice remained calm, completely professional, masking the nervous energy that was beginning to thrum beneath her skin. Dante looked up at her, genuinely surprised by the unexpected interruption. Most people actively avoided his gaze, instinctively shrinking away from his intimidating presence. This waitress, this girl with her simple ponytail and unpretentious uniform, was staring directly at him, calmly waiting for an answer. "The problem," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is that I am paying for quality and receiving garbage. The meat is not cooked as I requested. The meat is cooked exactly as you ordered it." Sarah didn't even flinch, maintaining unwavering eye contact. I saw it myself, before Antonio brought it out. The entire restaurant held its collective breath, suspended in silent anticipation. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Dante Moretti this way. It simply wasn't done. Are you telling me I'm wrong? Dante slowly rose to his full height, his imposing 6'3" frame towering over her. Men twice his size had instinctively stepped back from that posture, intimidated by his sheer presence. Grown men who had seen active combat had lowered their eyes under that piercing stare. Sarah tilted her head slightly, considering him with an expression that suggested she was calmly analyzing a particularly interesting, albeit somewhat perplexing, specimen. Then she spoke 3 simple words that would irrevocably alter both of their lives forever. "You don't own me." The silence that followed was almost deafening, absolute and all-encompassing. Somewhere in the distance, someone's fork clattered against delicate china, the sound echoing explosively in the otherwise quiet space. Antonio looked as though he might actually faint, his face drained of all color. The other diners stared in horrified fascination, breathlessly waiting for the inevitable explosion that was surely about to erupt. Dante Moretti, the man who controlled an empire through fear and intimidation, the man who made even hardened criminals nervous, found himself speechless, completely disarmed. No one had ever dared to speak to him like this, not in years. Not since he had painstakingly built his formidable reputation on the broken ashes of those who had foolishly challenged him. And this girl, this waitress with her defiant eyes and unwavering spine, didn't even seem to fully grasp who he was. For the first time in what felt like a decade, Dante Moretti felt something other than cold calculation and ruthless ambition. He felt a flicker of genuine fascination, a spark of something he hadn't experienced in years. "What's your name?" His voice had noticeably changed, losing its sharp, cutting edge. "Sarah." She didn't add "sir" or offer any additional deference. "And your meat is medium rare, exactly as ordered. But if you'd like it cooked differently, I'd be happy to ask Chef Michel to prepare another plate." The faintest ghost of a smile touched Dante's lips, a subtle curve that hinted at amusement. "That won't be necessary." He slowly sat back down, his eyes never leaving her face, studying her every reaction. "You're right. The meat is fine." The restaurant seemed to exhale collectively, the tension in the air visibly dissipating. Sarah nodded once, her expression remaining calm and composed. "Is there anything else you need?" "No." Dante's gaze intensified, becoming almost unnervingly direct. "But I'm sure I'll think of something." She turned to walk away, her heart pounding in her chest now that the initial surge of adrenaline was beginning to fade. What had she just done? Who was this man that the entire restaurant seemed to tremble before? "Sarah." His voice stopped her in her tracks. She turned back to face him. "You work here often?" 5 nights a week. "Good." Something flickered in his eyes, a brief expression that looked almost like warmth, quickly masked by his usual intensity. "Very good." As Sarah returned to the relative safety of the kitchen, she could feel his gaze following her across the room, a tangible weight on her back. Behind the swinging kitchen doors, Marco grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly tight. "Do you have any idea who that is?" His voice shook slightly, betraying his fear. "That's Dante Moretti. The Dante Moretti. He runs half the city's underground. People disappear when they cross him, Sarah. They just vanish." Sarah felt a sudden wave of ice water flood her veins, chilling her to the core. "I didn't know." "Well, now you do." Marco's expression was a complex mix of admiration and stark terror. "Either you just committed career suicide or—" He shook his head in disbelief. "I don't even know what you just did." Back in the dining room, Dante cut into his meat, a genuine smile playing at the corners of his lips. In his world, people constantly lied, schemed, and told him only what they thought he wanted to hear, carefully crafting their words to gain his favor or avoid his wrath. But this girl, this brave, foolish girl, had looked him directly in the eye and refused to back down, speaking her mind without hesitation or fear. His phone vibrated again, a persistent reminder of the problem at the docks, the ongoing theft, the usual endless stream of business that constantly demanded his immediate attention. But for the first time in years, Dante Moretti's mind was elsewhere entirely, completely consumed by thoughts of a waitress with light brown hair and fearless blue eyes. The waitress who had dared to speak 3 words that no one else would ever utter to his face. "You don't own me?" "No," he thought, watching her move through the restaurant with practiced grace and efficiency. "Not yet." 3 days had passed since the unexpected incident at Valentino's, and Sarah couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that she was being watched, constantly observed. She had initially chalked it up to simple paranoia, a result of Marco's dire warnings about Dante Moretti and his formidable reputation. A quick search on the internet had been of little help. Searching his name brought up only vague mentions in obscure business articles and a few society photographs, but nothing concrete, nothing that truly confirmed the terrifying reputation that Marco had so dramatically described. She reluctantly pushed through the restaurant's entrance for her evening shift, trying desperately to focus on anything other than the corner booth that had, of course, been reserved again for tonight. The same booth, the same time, every Tuesday. Antonio had pulled her aside that morning, his expression unusually grave and concerned. "Mr. Moretti specifically requested that you be his server tonight." Antonio's hands had actually trembled as he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, please, whatever happens, just be polite, professional. Don't—" He struggled to find the right words, his anxiety palpable. "Don't challenge him again." Now, as she nervously tied her red apron and checked her appearance one last time in the staff room mirror, Sarah felt her stomach twist with a knot of apprehension. She had spent the last 3 nights buried in nursing textbooks, researching advanced nursing techniques and pediatric care, desperately trying to push away any thoughts of those dark, intense eyes and that unsettling, dangerous smile. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the way he had looked at her after she had uttered those 3 fateful words, like she was some kind of complex puzzle he was now determined to solve. The dinner service started normally enough. Sarah took orders, delivered meals, and accepted compliments on the food with practiced grace, a well-rehearsed performance. But at precisely 8 o'clock, the entire atmosphere of the restaurant subtly shifted, a palpable tension filling the air. Dante Moretti walked through the front entrance as if he owned not just the restaurant, but the entire city block. 2 imposing men flanked him, their presence immediately commanding attention. Bodyguards, Sarah realized, noticing the telltale bulges under their jackets that strongly suggested concealed weapons, weapons she desperately hoped were just for show. Dante himself was wearing another impeccably tailored suit, this one a sophisticated charcoal grey paired with a sleek black shirt underneath. no tie. The thick gold chain at his throat caught the light with every movement, a subtle display of power and wealth. His eyes immediately found hers across the crowded room, locking onto her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Antonio practically ran to greet him, ushering him to the corner booth with the kind of exaggerated deference usually reserved for royalty or heads of state. The bodyguards took up strategic positions nearby, their intimidating presence making other diners visibly shift uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah. Antonio appeared suddenly at her elbow, his voice tight with barely contained nervousness. "Table 1. She nodded, silently gathering her composure around her like a suit of armor, preparing herself for the inevitable encounter. When she cautiously approached the corner booth, Dante was intently studying the menu, a menu he almost certainly had completely memorized by now. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti." Professional, polite, exactly what Antonio had so desperately begged her to be. Sarah. The way he said her name, like he had been thinking about it, savoring it, testing its weight on his tongue, made her pulse quicken involuntarily. "I was hoping you'd be here tonight. I work 5 nights a week, as I mentioned." "Yes." His lips curved slightly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "You did mention that." An awkward silence stretched between them, hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Sarah waited patiently, pen poised over her notepad, ready to take his order. "Aren't you going to ask if I want my usual?" Dante's tone held a definite note of amusement, as if he was enjoying this subtle game they were playing. "I assumed you'd tell me if you wanted something different. You assume a lot about me." "I assume nothing about you, Mr. Moretti. I don't know you." His smile widened, becoming almost predatory. "No, you don't. But you're not afraid to stand up to me anyway." Being afraid and being respectful are different things. Sarah met his intense gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "I'll show respect to anyone who shows it to me first." Dante leaned back in the booth, studying her with an unnerving intensity that made her feel completely exposed, as if he could see straight through her carefully constructed facade. "Do you know who I am now?" I imagine your co-workers have filled you in. I know you're important enough that everyone in this restaurant treats you like you could destroy their lives with a single word. And does that frighten you?" Sarah considered the question honestly, weighing her response carefully. "It concerns me. Power without accountability usually does." A laugh, genuine and genuinely surprised, escaped him, a spontaneous reaction he clearly hadn't anticipated. "You're remarkable, truly remarkable. I'm a nursing student who waits tables to pay tuition. There's nothing remarkable about that. You don't see yourself clearly." Dante's expression suddenly grew serious, losing all traces of amusement. "Most people look at me and see a title, a reputation, a threat. You look at me and see a man who was rude about his dinner. Weren't you? I was having a bad day." He paused, a flicker of something that almost resembled remorse crossing his features. "That's not an excuse. It's an explanation." "Apology accepted." Sarah's tone softened slightly, her initial defensiveness receding. "Now, what would you like to eat? Have dinner with me." The unexpected request hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken implications. Sarah blinked, momentarily stunned, certain she had somehow misheard him. "I'm working. After your shift then, Mr. Moretti." "Dante." His voice was quiet but firm, brooking no argument. "When you're not on the clock, Call me Dante. That wouldn't be appropriate. Why not? Sarah struggled to formulate an answer that didn't sound like the absolute truth, that every single instinct screamed that this man was incredibly dangerous, that getting involved with someone like him was career suicide at best and potentially lethal at worst. Because you're a customer and I'm staff, there are boundaries. Boundaries. Dante repeated the word as if it was entirely foreign to him, something he had never encountered before. I've built my entire life on breaking boundaries that other people accept as absolute. That's not the recommendation you think it is. Another laugh, this one tinged with something darker, a hint of self-awareness. No, I suppose it isn't. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense and unwavering, as if he was trying to decipher her deepest secrets. What if I told you I can't stop thinking about you? That for 3 days I've conducted business meetings, handled complex problems, made crucial decisions that affect the lives of hundreds of people, and through it all, I kept seeing your face. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, threatening to burst from her chest. I'd say you don't know me well enough for that to be true. Then let me know you. Dante's intensity was almost palpable, a physical force. One dinner, one conversation. If you still want nothing to do with me after that, I'll never ask again. And if I say no right now... His expression flickered slightly, betraying a vulnerability he quickly masked. Then I'll respect that decision and order my usual meal like nothing happened. She should say no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to say no, to run as far away from this man as possible. But there was something in his eyes, a glimpse of a vulnerability that seemed completely at odds with the dangerous crime lord everyone described, like he was genuinely asking for something he had forgotten how to want, a connection he thought was forever out of his reach. One dinner, Sarah heard herself say, almost in disbelief. After my shift, somewhere public. Dante's smile could have melted steel, radiating pure relief and genuine pleasure. Anywhere you want. The cafe, 2 blocks from here, Yepes, at 11 o'clock. I'll be there. He handed her the menu without even glancing at it, his attention completely focused on her. And for now, I'll have the ossobuco, medium rare. Sarah couldn't suppress the small smile that tugged at the corners of her lips. Of course, Mr. Moretti. Dante, he corrected softly, his eyes never leaving hers. Dante, she repeated, almost testing the sound of his name on her tongue, and watched something fierce and possessive flash across his face at the sound of his name on her lips, a primal response she didn't fully understand. As Sarah walked back to the kitchen, she could feel the weight of every eye in the restaurant following her, burning into her back. What had she just agreed to? Marco would think she had completely lost her mind. Antonio would probably have a heart attack. But when she glanced back just once, she saw that Dante was watching her with an expression that looked almost like hope, and that more than anything terrified her. The rest of her shift passed in a complete blur. Sarah went through the motions, mechanically taking orders, delivering food, smiling at customers, while her mind raced with second thoughts, replaying the conversation over and over again. At 10:45, she changed out of her uniform in the staff room, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned her simple blue dress. "You're really doing this?" Marco stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and utter disbelief. One coffee, one conversation with a man who makes senators nervous. Marco crossed his arms, his face etched with worry. Sarah, I've worked here for 8 years. I've seen things, heard things. The Moretti family doesn't play by normal rules. I know. Do you really know? Because this isn't some bad boy with a motorcycle. Sarah, this is... He lowered his voice, glancing around as if he was afraid of being overheard. There are rumors about what happens to people who cross his organization, about the methods they use to maintain control. He's not going to hurt me over coffee. Marco, maybe not directly, but his world. Marco shook his head, his eyes filled with a chilling certainty. That world destroys people just by proximity. Sarah finished with her buttons, meeting her friend's worried gaze in the mirror, forcing a confident smile. I appreciate your concern, really, but I can handle myself. That's what worries me. Marco sighed, running a hand through his hair in exasperation. You're strong enough to stand up to him, but maybe not smart enough to run away. His unsettling words followed her out of the restaurant and down the 2 blocks to Yepes Cafe, a 24-hour spot that was popular with both students and night shift workers. Through the wide windows, she could see Dante already seated in a corner booth, somehow managing to make the humble cafe look like a high-end establishment simply by his commanding presence. His bodyguards waited outside, she noted, discreetly positioned near the entrance. At least he had respected her request for a public setting. Sarah pushed through the door, and Dante immediately stood, the gesture both old-fashioned and oddly charming, catching her off guard. You came. Relief colored his voice, a genuine emotion she hadn't expected to see. I said I would. Sarah slid into the booth across from him, trying to ignore the sudden flutter of nerves in her stomach. I don't make promises I can't keep. Up close, without the dramatic lighting of Valentino's, she could see details she had missed before, subtle imperfections that humanized him in a way she hadn't anticipated. Faint scars on his knuckles, a tiny scar above his left eyebrow, shadows under his eyes that suggested sleep didn't come easily to him. Coffee? Dante gestured to the server, who was hovering nervously nearby. Please. Black. They sat in silence until the coffee arrived, both seemingly unsure how to begin this conversation they had both insisted on having, uncertain of the unspoken rules that governed this strange, unexpected encounter. "Why me?" Sarah finally asked, breaking the tense silence. "You could have anyone. Women who understand your world, who would jump at the chance to be with someone like you. Someone like me." Dante's expression hardened slightly, a defensive wall rising around him. "You mean someone who operates outside the law? Someone whose family name is synonymous with organized crime?" "I didn't say that, but you thought it." "Marco told you, didn't he, about who the Morettis are?" Sarah didn't deny it, seeing no point in lying. "He told me to be careful, that you're dangerous." "And are you being careful?" "I'm here, aren't I?" She wrapped her hands around the warm coffee mug, seeking comfort in its simple heat. "That's either incredibly brave or monumentally stupid." Brave," Dante said quietly, his gaze intense and unwavering. "Definitely brave. You haven't answered my question. Why me?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his untouched coffee cup, lost in thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, with less of the commanding edge she had heard at the restaurant, almost vulnerable. "Do you know what it's like to live in a world where everyone lies to you, where every conversation is calculated, every smile is fake, every compliment is designed to gain favor or avoid punishment? Dante's dark eyes met hers, pleading for understanding. I've lived that way since I was 22 years old. 10 years of people telling me what they think I want to hear instead of the truth. That sounds lonely. It is. The admission seemed to cost him something, a difficult confession he had rarely, if ever, voiced. And then you, this waitress I've never met, you looked me in the eye and refused to back down. You didn't care that I was angry, didn't care about my reputation or my family name. You just stood your ground. You were being unreasonable about the food. A genuine laugh escaped him, a sound that surprised her. I was completely unreasonable. I was angry about business and took it out on your chef's perfectly cooked veal. See, the truth isn't so hard. It is when you've forgotten how to tell it. Dante leaned forward, his intensity returning, his gaze fixed on her face. For 3 days, I couldn't stop thinking about those 3 words. You don't own me. Nobody talks to me like that, Sarah. Nobody dares. Maybe someone should have a long time ago. Maybe. His smile was sad, tinged with a deep-seated weariness. My father used to say that absolute power corrupts absolutely. I always thought he was weak for believing that. Now I wonder if he was just wise enough to see the cage before it closed. Sarah felt her carefully constructed defensive walls cracking slightly, crumbling under the weight of his unexpected honesty. This wasn't the dangerous crime Lord Marco had described, the ruthless and heartless manipulator. This was a man who seemed tired of his own power, exhausted by the role he had been born into, trapped by the very life he had inherited. How did you end up in this life? The question escaped before she could consciously stop it, a spontaneous expression of her growing curiosity. Dante's expression shuttered, his eyes clouding over with a darkness she couldn't quite decipher. That's a longer conversation, one I'm not sure you're ready for. Try me. He studied her face intently, like he was trying to determine how much truth she could handle, how much she could bear to know. My father ran the Moretti organization before me. When I was 22, rivals made a move against us, a power grab. My father, he didn't survive the power struggle that followed. I'm sorry, don't be. He knew the risks. Dante's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, the detached tone of someone who had learned to bury pain deep within themselves, shielding himself from the lingering effects of trauma. I inherited his empire, his enemies, and his reputation. I was given a choice: lead the family or watch it crumble while vultures picked at the remains. That's not much of a choice. No, he agreed, his gaze distant. It wasn't. Sarah found herself leaning forward, drawn into his story, despite her better judgment, her initial apprehension slowly giving way to a growing sense of empathy. Do you ever regret it? The life you chose? Every day? The answer was immediate and raw, an unfiltered burst of honesty that startled her. But regret doesn't change reality. I've done things. He stopped abruptly, his jaw tightening as if he was physically restraining himself from saying more. I've made decisions I can't take back, built a reputation on fear and absolute control because in my world, weakness gets you killed. And now I'm sitting in a cafe at midnight drinking coffee with a nursing student who stood up to me over veal, and I can't remember the last time I felt this normal. Dante's laugh was self-deprecating, laced with a hint of bitterness. Pathetic, isn't it? It's honest. Sarah reached across the table before she could second-guess the spontaneous gesture, her hand covering his. offering a silent gesture of support. And honesty is never pathetic. The moment her skin touched his, an undeniable electricity seemed to arc between them, a jolt of energy that made her skin tingle. Dante's eyes widened slightly, and Sarah felt heat flood her cheeks, a blush spreading across her face. She started to pull away, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment, but his other hand covered hers, gently holding it in place. "Sarah." Her name was barely a whisper, a soft murmur against the quiet hum of the cafe. "You should run from me. You should finish this coffee, walk out that door, and never look back. Is that what you want? What I want?" His grip tightened slightly, his gaze intense and searching. "What I want is dangerous for both of us. Let me make my own decisions about danger." Dante's phone buzzed insistently on the table, a jarring intrusion on their intimate moment. He ignored it, his attention completely focused on her. It buzzed again and again, a persistent reminder of the world outside. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he glanced at the screen, his expression immediately transforming, the lines of his face hardening into an emotionless mask. Whatever he saw there made his expression go cold and hard, the dangerous crime lord instantly replacing the vulnerable man she had glimpsed just moments before. "I have to go." He stood abruptly, his movements quick and decisive. "There's a situation that requires my immediate attention. Is everything okay?" "It will be." The promise in those 3 words sounded more like a threat, a dark warning she couldn't ignore. The words were ominous. "Once I handle it," he'd said. Sarah stood too, suddenly uncertain. "Will I see you again?" Dante pulled out his wallet, leaving $300 bills on the table for 2 cups of coffee. When he looked at her, the warmth had returned to his eyes, despite the tension in his jaw. "Count on it," he said, hesitating, then reached out to tuck a strand of her light brown hair behind her ear. The gesture was surprisingly gentle from such dangerous hands. "Be careful going home. Take a cab. I left enough to cover it." "I don't need—" The words seemed to pain him. "Let me do this one normal thing. Let me worry about you getting home safely." Sarah nodded, too overwhelmed to argue. Dante started toward the door, his bodyguards materializing from the shadows outside. At the threshold he turned back. "Those 3 words you said at the restaurant. You were right. I don't own you." His smile was fierce and possessive all at once. "But I'm going to spend every day trying to earn the right to be in your life." Then he was gone, leaving Sarah standing in the cafe with a racing heart and the terrifying realization that she was already in too deep to walk away. Outside, she could see him speaking rapidly to his men, his entire demeanor transformed into something cold and lethal. This was the man Marco warned her about, the man who made people disappear. But she'd also seen the other man, the one who seemed desperate for a taste of normalcy, who'd looked at her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning for years. Sarah flagged down a cab with shaking hands, Dante's money still warm in her palm. As the city lights blurred past her window, she couldn't help but wonder what situation had called him away so urgently. And somewhere across the city, in a warehouse by the docks, Dante Moretti stood over a man who'd made the fatal mistake of stealing from him, his expression carved from ice. "You took from my family." His voice was quiet, deadly. "You know what that means," the man whimpered, pleading, but Dante's mind was elsewhere, on light brown hair and fearless blue eyes, on a girl who touched his hand like he deserved gentleness instead of fear. "Take care of it," he told his men, turning away before the inevitable conclusion. "And make sure everyone knows what happens to thieves." As he walked out of the warehouse, Dante pulled out his phone and looked at Sarah's contact information. Antonio had been persuaded to share it. His thumb hovered over her number. He should leave her alone, should let her live her normal life, finish nursing school, find some ordinary guy who could give her the safe, predictable future she deserved. But Dante Moretti had spent 10 years taking what he wanted without apology, and he'd never wanted anything as much as he wanted Sarah Mitchell. 2 weeks passed in a blur of text messages, late-night phone calls, and stolen moments between Sarah's shifts and Dante's increasingly mysterious business meetings. They met for coffee 3 more times, each conversation peeling back another layer of the armor they both wore. Sarah learned that Dante spoke 4 languages, had a degree in economics from Harvard that he never used, and secretly donated to children's hospitals under shell company names. He learned that she'd lost both parents in a car accident when she was 19, that she worked 3 jobs to afford nursing school, and that her dream was to work in pediatric oncology. "Why cancer?" Dante had asked during their last cafe meeting, his hand finding hers across the table like it belonged there. "Because kids shouldn't have to be that brave," Sarah's voice had caught. "Because someone should fight for them as hard as they're fighting to survive." The look in Dante's eyes had made her breath stop, like she'd said something that fundamentally changed how he saw the world. But they hadn't moved beyond these public meetings. No dates at restaurants, no invitations to his world, and certainly nothing like the kiss that Sarah found herself thinking about far too often late at night. Tonight, Valentino was hosting a private event for the city's elite, politicians, business leaders, and the kind of people who move through society's upper echelons with practiced grace. Sarah had been asked to work the event, the tips too good to refuse, even though final exams loomed just 2 weeks away. She was carrying a tray of champagne flutes through the crowd when she felt eyes on her. Turning, she found Dante across the room, devastating in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than her entire year's tuition. He was speaking with an older man in an expensive suit, but his attention was focused entirely on her. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Sarah felt heat flood her cheeks. He excused himself from his conversation and began moving toward her with predatory grace, ignoring the people who tried to stop him for networking opportunities. Sarah set down her tray with shaking hands, suddenly very aware that she was in her work uniform while he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. "You're here." Dante's voice was low as he reached her, pitched for her ears only. "I work here, remember?" "I know. I may have requested your name specifically for tonight's event. Dante, dance with me. I'm working. The event coordinator owes me a favor." His hand extended toward her. "1 dance, Sarah. That's all I'm asking." She should say no, should remind him about boundaries and professionalism, but the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the entire room, made rational thought impossible. Sarah placed her hand in his, and Dante's fingers closed around hers with gentle possession. He led her to the edge of the dance floor, where other couples swayed to the orchestra's rendition of a classic standard. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and distinctly him. Sarah's hand rested on his shoulder, and they began to move together like they'd done this 1,000 times before. "You're a good dancer," she observed, trying to ignore how perfectly she fit against him. "My mother insisted on lessons when I was young." Dante's hand spread across the small of her back. "She thought ballroom dancing would make me civilized." "Did it work?" "What do you think?" Sarah looked up at him, at the dangerous beauty of his face, the barely leashed power in how he held her, the way other couples gave them a wide berth on the dance floor. "I think you're capable of being civilized when it suits you, and terrifying when it doesn't." "And which do you prefer?" "I prefer honesty." She met his dark eyes steadily. "I prefer the man who calls me at midnight because he can't sleep, the one who listens to me complain about organic chemistry exams and actually seems interested." "I am interested." Dante's voice was intense. "I'm interested in everything about you, Sarah. What you think, what you dream about, what makes you laugh." He pulled her fractionally closer. "What makes you feel, Dante?" Her voice was breathless now. "I know this is complicated. I know I come with baggage that would make most people run for the hills." His jaw tightened. "But I can't stop wanting you. Can't stop thinking about you. You've become the first thing on my mind when I wake up and the last thing before I sleep." "You barely know me." "Then let me know you better. Let me—" He stopped mid-sentence, his entire body going rigid. Sarah felt the change in him instantly, the way his hand on her back shifted from gentle to protective, how his eyes moved past her to scan the room with sudden alertness. "What's wrong?" "Don't turn around." His voice was quiet, commanding. "Just keep dancing." But Sarah had already caught sight of what had triggered his reaction. Near the bar, 3 men in suits were watching them with expressions that made her blood run cold. They weren't looking at Dante with the nervous respect she'd seen from other people. They were looking at him like predators sizing up prey. "Who are they?" "Trouble." Dante's hand tightened on her waist. "The tall one is Marco Russo. He runs the North End territory. Rival family. Ambitious rival family." His expression was carved from stone. "They've been pushing boundaries lately, testing my patience." One of the men, Marco Russo, started moving toward them across the dance floor. Dante's bodyguards materialized from the edges of the room, but he subtly waved them back. "Moretti." Russo stopped a few feet away, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "Didn't expect to see you at this charity circus." "Russo." Dante's voice was pleasant, lethal. "I could say the same. Business brings me everywhere these days." Russo's gaze slid to Sarah with insulting slowness. "New acquisition?" Sarah felt Dante's entire body coil with rage, but his expression remained almost bored. "Careful, Marco. You're speaking about a lady." "My apologies." The words were mocking. "I didn't realize the Moretti family had started recruiting from waitstaff. Times must be tough." "Walk away, Russo." Dante's voice dropped to something that barely qualified as human. "While you still can." "Or what? You'll make me disappear like the others?" Russo laughed, though there was an edge of nervousness to it. "We both know those days are numbered. New blood is coming to this city. Moretti, your family's reign is ending." The orchestra had stopped playing. The entire ballroom had gone silent, everyone watching the confrontation with horrified fascination. Sarah felt Dante's hand trembling slightly against her back, not with fear, she realized, but with the effort of restraining himself from violence. "This isn't the place." Dante's words were ice. But soon, Marco, very soon, we're going to have a long conversation about respect. Looking forward to it. Russo's smile was ugly. In the meantime, enjoy your waitress while you still can. He walked away, his men following like shadows. The orchestra resumed playing, but the festive atmosphere had shattered. Dante's jaw was set so hard, Sarah worried he might crack a tooth. I need to go now. Dante, wait. No. He stepped back from her, and the loss of his warmth felt physical. You need to stay away from me, Sarah. I thought I could. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect style. I thought I could keep you separate from this world. But I was wrong. What are you talking about? Russo knows about you now. He saw us together, which means... Dante's expression was anguished. Which means you're a target, a weakness he can exploit. I can handle myself. Not against people like him. Dante's hands framed her face, his touch gentle despite the fear in his eyes. You don't understand. These aren't people who play by rules, who have limits. If Russo thinks hurting you will hurt me... He couldn't finish the sentence. Then what? You're going to walk away? Pretend these last 2 weeks didn't happen? If it keeps you safe, yes. Sarah grabbed his wrists, holding his hands against her face. That's not your decision to make. I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be protected from reality. But you are precious. Dante's voice cracked slightly. You're the first good thing I've had in a decade, Sarah. The first pure, honest thing in a life built on lies and violence. I won't let that world touch you. It already has. She pulled his hands down, but didn't let go. The moment I stood up to you in the restaurant, the moment I agreed to that first coffee, I stopped being separate from your world. Then I'll push you out of it for your own good. No. Sarah's voice was fierce. You don't get to decide what's good for me. You don't get to make this choice alone. Before Dante could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgency that suggested catastrophe. He looked at the screen, and whatever he saw there drained the color from his face. What is it? Russo's men just hit one of my warehouses. His voice was hollow. This is a declaration of war. Dante, I have to go. He was already moving toward the exit, his bodyguards flanking him. Stay here. Stay in public. I'll have someone watch your apartment until this is over. Until what's over? But he was already gone, leaving Sarah standing alone on the dance floor while the orchestra played on and the city's elite pretended not to stare. Sarah's hands shook as she returned to work, going through the motions of serving drinks while her mind raced. This was the world Dante lived in, where threats at parties preceded actual violence, where men talked about eliminating rivals like they were discussing business acquisitions. The event ended at midnight. Sarah changed out of her uniform in the staff room, checking her phone compulsively for messages from Dante. Nothing. She stepped outside to find a black SUV idling at the curb, one of Dante's vehicles, with his head of security behind the wheel. Ms. Mitchell. The man's voice was professional. Mr. Moretti asked me to ensure you get home safely. Sarah wanted to argue, to insist she didn't need protection, but the memory of Marco Russo's cold eyes stopped her. She climbed into the SUV, hyper-aware of the second vehicle that followed them through the dark city streets. Her apartment building looked the same as always, the familiar brick facade, the broken light on the third floor, the sounds of her neighbors' lives filtering through thin walls. But now Sarah saw it through new eyes, understanding how vulnerable she was here. The security guard walked her to her door, checking the apartment before allowing her inside. "I'll be in the lobby, Ms. Mitchell. You need anything? Call this number." He handed her a card. Alone in her small studio, Sarah finally allowed herself to process what had happened: Dante's anguished expression, Rousseau's threatening smile, the revelation that simply being associated with Dante Moretti made her a target in wars she didn't understand. Her phone buzzed. Finally. "Dante, are you home safe?" "Sarah?" "Yes." "Your security is very thorough." "Dante, good. Stay there. Lock the doors. Don't go anywhere alone until I tell you it's safe." "Sarah, what's happening?" The three dots indicating he was typing appeared and disappeared several times before his response came through. "Things I hoped you'd never have to know about. The reality of who I am and what my world looks like when it turns violent." "Dante, are you safe?" The question hung unanswered for long minutes. "I'm handling it." "But Sarah, I meant what I said. We can't see each other anymore. Not until this is over. Maybe not even then." "Sarah, you don't get to decide that alone. Dante, if something happened to you because of me, because of my world, I couldn't survive that. You're the best part of my day. Every day. The only good thing I have, which is exactly why I need to keep you away from the darkness." Sarah stared at her phone, tears burning her eyes. She'd known this was complicated, had understood on some level that Dante's world came with danger, but the reality was different from the concept, sharper, more frightening, more real. Her phone rang. Dante's name lit up the screen. "Hello. I needed to hear your voice." He sounded exhausted. "One last time before I do what needs to be done." "What are you going to do, Dante?" "What I always do when someone threatens my family." His voice was cold, emotionless. "I'm going to remind Marco Russo and everyone else in this city why the Moretti name still means something." "That sounds ominous." "It should." A pause. "The man you've been getting to know these past weeks, the one who drinks coffee at midnight and listens to your stories about organic chemistry. That's who I want to be. But it's not who I am when my family is under attack." "You're both people, Dante. One doesn't erase the other, does it?" His laugh was bitter. "Sarah, I've done things that would horrify you, made decisions that destroyed lives. My hands aren't clean, and they never will be." "I know." Her voice was quiet, but steady. "I've known from the beginning that you're not some misunderstood hero, but I also know you're capable of tenderness, of caring, of being more than what your world demands. You see what you want to see." "I see the truth, both truths." Sarah wiped at her tears. "The question is whether you're brave enough to let yourself be both people instead of just the monster everyone expects." Silence on the line, broken only by the sound of his breathing. "I have to go," Dante finally said. "The situation requires my attention." "Will you call me after? Just let me know you're okay." "Sarah, please just let me know you're okay." "I'll text you." His voice softened fractionally. "Lock your doors. Stay safe." "You too." The line went dead. Sarah stood in her apartment, hugging herself against a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Somewhere across the city, Dante was preparing to wage war, to be the dangerous crime lord instead of the man who couldn't sleep without hearing her voice. And she was falling in love with both versions of him, which, Sarah reflected as she locked her doors and windows with shaking hands, made her either the bravest woman in the city or the biggest fool, possibly both. Outside her building, 2 of Dante's security team took up positions in the shadows. Inside, Sarah curled up on her couch with her phone clutched in her hand, waiting for a text that might never come. Across the city, in the private back room of a social club that never officially existed, Dante Moretti sat at the head of a table surrounded by his most trusted men. Russo made his choice when he hit our warehouse. His voice was cold, calculated. Now we show him what choosing wrong looks like. The men nodded, their expressions grim. They all knew what was coming, the kind of response that would echo through the city's underground for months. But as Dante outlined his strategy, his mind kept drifting to light brown hair and fearless blue eyes, to a girl who believed he could be more than a monster. For her, he thought, he would end this war quickly, decisively, and then he would have to make the hardest choice of his life, keep Sarah safe by walking away, or risk her safety by asking her to choose him, despite everything she now knew. His phone sat on the table, silent and accusing. 3 words kept echoing in his mind, the same 3 words that had started everything. You don't own me. No, Dante thought as he prepared to unleash hell on Marco Russo. But you own me, Sarah Mitchell. You own every part of me that remembers how to be human. And that, more than any threat from rivals, terrified him completely. 3 days of silence. Sarah went to class, took exams, and served tables at Valentino's with mechanical precision, while her mind remained locked on her phone, waiting for a text that never came. The security detail outside her apartment building had doubled grim-faced men in dark suits who nodded politely when she passed, but refused to answer questions about Dante. The city felt different now. Sarah noticed things she'd been blind to before, the way certain neighborhoods went quiet when expensive cars rolled through, how people on the street would suddenly find somewhere else to be when men in suits appeared, the unspoken understanding that some businesses were fronts for activities that never appeared on tax returns. She'd been living in Dante's world without realizing it. Now she couldn't unsee it. On the 4th morning, Sarah woke to find her phone flooded with news alerts, a massive fire at a warehouse in the North End, federal investigations into the Russo family's business operations. Marco Russo himself had reportedly left the city, though the articles were vague about whether his departure was voluntary. The war, it seemed, had ended, but at what cost? Sarah's phone finally buzzed with a text. "Can I see you? Tonight, the cafe, please." Her hands shook as she typed her response. "What time?" "Whenever you can get there. I'll wait as long as it takes." She should have been angry about the days of silence, the fear and uncertainty. Instead, Sarah felt relief flood through her so intensely it made her dizzy. He was alive. He was safe. And he wanted to see her. Sarah called in sick to work, the first time she'd done so in 3 years, and spent the day oscillating between excitement and dread. What would he tell her? How bad had things gotten? And most importantly, did he still want to push her away for her own protection? By 7 o'clock, she couldn't wait any longer. Sarah, dressed carefully in a blue sweater and jeans, applied minimal makeup and braided her light brown hair over one shoulder. In the mirror, she looked young and nervous, nothing like someone who should be involved with a man who wielded the kind of power Dante commanded. The cafe was nearly empty when she arrived. Dante sat in their usual corner booth, and Sarah's breath caught at the sight of him. He looked exhausted shadows under his eyes, his normally perfect hair slightly disheveled, and a tension in his shoulders that suggested he hadn't slept in days. When he saw her, something in his expression cracked relief, longing and pain all mixed together. Sarah slid into the booth across from him, and for a long moment they just stared at each other. "You look terrible," she finally said. A surprised laugh escaped him. "Always honest. You asked me to be." "I did." Dante's hand reached across the table, palm up, an invitation. Sarah placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers like she was a lifeline. "I'm sorry for the silence, for disappearing, for—" He stopped, struggling with words. "For everything you must have imagined these past few days." "What happened with Russo?" "It's over." His voice was flat, emotionless, in the way she'd learned meant he was protecting himself. "His organization is scattered. The federal investigation will keep him occupied for years, and he understands now that coming after my family has consequences." "Did you?" Sarah couldn't finish the question. "No." Dante's eyes met hers. "I wanted to. Part of me still wants to, but I made him a deal instead. Leave the city, cooperate with federal investigators on unrelated matters, and I'd let him walk away intact." "Why?" "Because of you." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Because the man you see when you look at me, the one who drinks coffee at midnight and listens to your stories, that man doesn't solve everything with violence, and I'm trying to be him more than I'm the other version." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "That must have been difficult." "You have no idea." Dante's jaw tightened. "Every instinct I have, everything I was taught, every example my father set, it all screamed to handle Russo the old way permanently. But then I'd think about you, about the disappointment. The words he spoke carried a weight, each syllable pregnant with meaning that lingered in the air between them. The ominous words hung heavy in the quiet atmosphere. He spoke with an edge, a clear indicator of his feelings about what he'd said. Sarah, though overwhelmed, suddenly realized she had to stand her ground. "Will I see you again?" she asked, the question both vulnerable and defiant. It echoed her deepest hopes and a tinge of fear. Dante, seemingly taken aback, reached for his wallet. The action was smooth, practiced. He placed several crisp $100 bills on the table, a small fortune for just 2 cups of coffee. When his gaze finally met hers, the ice in his eyes had thawed, replaced by a surprising warmth. Despite the apparent tension in his jaw, a genuine softness emerged. "Count on it," he affirmed, a barely perceptible hesitation preceding his words. Then he reached out, his hand moving with unexpected gentleness. He delicately tucked a strand of her light brown hair behind her ear, a tender act completely at odds with the dangerous aura that typically surrounded him. "Be careful getting home," he said, his voice low. "Take a cab. I left enough to cover it. I don't need—" The word seemed to physically pain him, as if forcing it out choked him. He paused, then continued, his voice tinged with a raw vulnerability that pierced through Sarah's defenses. "Let me do this one normal thing," he implored. "Let me worry about you getting home safely." Sarah, caught in the storm of his conflicting emotions, could only offer a silent nod. She felt overwhelmed and struggled to find the words to argue. Dante turned towards the door, his movements precise. Almost as if they were summoned, his bodyguards materialized from the shadows just outside the cafe. He paused at the threshold, his hand hovering on the doorframe, then turned back to face her. "Those 3 words you said at the restaurant," he began, his voice resonating with a newfound respect. "You were right. I don't own you." A smile played on his lips, a complex expression that mingled both fierce intensity and possessive hunger. But despite its heat, it carried a promise of change. "But I'm going to spend every day trying to earn the right to be in your life." With those final words, Dante turned and disappeared, leaving Sarah alone in the cafe. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet setting. The realization crashed over her that she was already in too deep to turn back. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of him issuing rapid-fire instructions to his men. The transformation was stark, like a switch had been flipped. The gentle warmth that had momentarily graced his features vanished, replaced by a cold, lethal expression. This was the man Marco had warned her about, the phantom figure capable of making people vanish without a trace. And yet, she'd seen another side of him, a man desperate for a taste of normalcy. This man looked at her as if she were the air he needed. Her hands trembling, Sarah hailed a taxi, Dante's money feeling oddly warm against her palm. As the city lights whizzed by, she couldn't help but wonder what urgent matter had drawn him away. Elsewhere, across town in a dimly lit warehouse, Dante Moretti stood over a man who had made the grave error of stealing from him. His face was a mask of ice, devoid of any emotion. "You took from my family," he said, his voice a quiet menace that sliced through the silence. "You know what that means," the man whimpered, his voice laced with fear and desperation. He began pleading for his life, but Dante's mind was miles away, his thoughts consumed by the image of light brown hair and the fearless blue eyes. He was lost in the memory of her hand touching his, treating him with a gentleness he rarely received. "Take care of it," he instructed his men, turning away before the inevitable occurred. "And make sure everyone knows what happens to thieves." Dante strode out of the warehouse, pulling out his phone as he went. He located Sarah's contact information. Antonio had provided it. His thumb hovered over the call button. He contemplated the possibility of leaving her alone, of letting her live a normal life, finishing nursing school and finding an ordinary man who could provide her with the safe, predictable future she deserved. But Dante Moretti had spent a decade taking what he wanted without so much as an apology. Never had he wanted anything as much as he wanted Sarah Mitchell. 2 weeks flew by in a flurry of late-night text exchanges and stolen phone calls. The moments they managed to find together were fleeting, squeezed between Sarah's long shifts and Dante's increasingly mysterious business meetings. They met for coffee 3 more times, each conversation like peeling back a layer. Sarah discovered that Dante spoke 4 languages fluently, possessed a degree in economics from Harvard that he never utilized, and secretly donated to children's hospitals. In turn, he learned about the car accident when she was 19, worked 3 jobs to pay for nursing school, and her dream to work in pediatric oncology. "Why cancer?" Dante had asked during their last meeting at the cafe, his hand reaching across the table to find hers. "Because kids shouldn't have to be that brave." Sarah's voice broke. "Because someone should fight for them as hard as they're fighting to survive." The intensity in Dante's eyes had stolen her breath. Yet their encounters remained limited to brief public meetings. There were no dates at fancy restaurants, no invitations into his exclusive world, and certainly nothing resembling the kiss. Valentino was hosting an exclusive private event for the city's elite, and Sarah's boss had asked her to work the event. Although she'd much rather spend that time studying for final exams, the tips were simply too lucrative to pass up. Sarah moved through the throng of people balancing a tray of champagne flutes when she sensed someone watching her. Turning, she spotted Dante across the room, dressed in an expensive black tuxedo that likely cost more than her annual tuition. He was engrossed in conversation with an older man in an expensive suit, but his full attention was fixed on her. Their eyes met across the room, and Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck. He excused himself and began moving toward her, ignoring the networkers who tried to flag him down for a quick word. Her hands shaking, Sarah quickly set her tray down. She was acutely conscious of the contrast between her uniform and his formal attire. "You're here." Dante's voice was low and focused, barely audible above the din of the party. "I work here, remember?" "I know." "In fact, I may have specifically requested your name for tonight's event." "Dante," she said, her voice a playful tease. "Dance with me." "I'm working." "The event coordinator owes me a favor." He extended his hand. "One dance, Sarah. That's all I'm asking." She knew she should decline, should remind him about their respective roles at this event. But the way he looked at her, as if she was the most important woman there, obliterated any semblance of rational thought. Sarah placed her hand in his fingers closing around hers with a gentle assurance that sent a shiver down her spine. He guided her to the edge of the dance floor, and they began to sway. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her close enough that she could smell his cologne, something she recognized. Sarah rested her hand on his shoulder, and they moved as one. "You're a good dancer," she said, trying to ignore how seamlessly they seemed to fit together. "My mother insisted on lessons when I was young. She thought ballroom dancing would make me civilized." Dante's hand pressed firmly against the small of her back. "Did it work?" "What do you think?" Sarah looked up, trying to ignore how the other dancers were giving them a wide circle. "I think you're capable of being civilized when it suits you, and terrifying when it doesn't. Which do you prefer?" "I prefer honesty," she said without hesitation. "I prefer the man who calls me at midnight because he can't sleep. I prefer the one who listens to me complain about organic chemistry exams and actually seems interested." "I am interested," Dante said. "I'm interested in everything about you, what you think, what you dream about, what makes you laugh." He pulled her closer, almost imperceptibly. "What makes you feel, Dante?" she asked, the question barely a whisper. "I know this is complicated. I know I come with baggage that would send most people running." His jaw tightened, but he didn't waver. I can't stop wanting you, can't stop thinking about you. You've become the first thing on my mind when I wake up and the last thing before I sleep. You barely know me. Then let me know you better. Let me... He cut himself off. Sarah instantly felt the change in him. His grip tightened, and his gaze darted around the room, alert. What's wrong? Don't turn around. His voice was low, commanding. Just keep dancing. But Sarah already knew what was wrong. Near the bar, 3 men were staring at them. Their expressions made Sarah's blood run cold. Who are they? Trouble. Dante's hand tightened at her waist. The tall one is Marco Russo. He runs the North End. Rival family. Ambitious rival family. His face was hard. They've been pushing boundaries, testing my patience. Marco Russo started walking toward them across the dance floor. Dante's bodyguards stepped forward, but Dante waved them back. Moretti, Russo said, stopping a few feet away. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Didn't expect to see you at this charity circus. Russo, Dante said, his voice pleasant but lethal. I could say the same. Business brings me everywhere these days. Russo's eyes slid to Sarah with insulting slowness. New acquisition. Sarah felt Dante's body tense, but he kept his expression casual. Careful, Marco. You're speaking about a lady. My apologies, Russo said, the words laced with sarcasm. I didn't realize the Moretti family was recruiting from the waitstaff. Times must be tough. Walk away, Russo, Dante said, his voice dropping to a dangerous murmur. While you still can. Or what? You'll make me disappear like the others? Russo laughed nervously. We both know those days are numbered. New blood is coming to this city. Moretti, your family's reign is ending. The orchestra stopped playing, and the ballroom went silent. Everyone stared at the confrontation. Sarah felt Dante's hand trembling slightly against her back. This isn't the place, Dante said, his voice like ice. But soon, Marco, very soon, we're going to have a long conversation about respect. Looking forward to it, Russo said, his smile ugly. In the meantime, enjoy your waitress while you still can. He turned and walked away. The orchestra started up again, but the mood was ruined. Dante's jaw was so tight that Sarah wondered if he might crack a tooth. I need to go now. Dante, wait. No. He stepped away from her, and Sarah felt the loss of his presence. You need to stay away from me, Sarah. I thought I could keep you separate from this world, but I was wrong. What are you talking about? Russo knows about you now. He saw us together, which means... Dante's face was anguished. Which means you're a target. I can handle myself. Not against people like him. These aren't people who play by the rules. He cupped her face in his hands. You don't understand. If Russo thinks hurting you will hurt me... He didn't finish the sentence. Then what? You're going to walk away? Pretend the last 2 weeks didn't happen. If it keeps you safe, yes. Sarah grabbed his wrists, holding his hands against her face. That's not your decision to make. But you are precious, Dante said. It already has, she answered. The moment I stood up to you in this restaurant, the moment I agreed to that first coffee, I stopped being separate from your world. Then I'll push you out of it. No, Sarah declared. You don't get to decide what's good for me. Before Dante could respond, his phone buzzed, and he looked at it. What is it? Russo's men just hit one of my warehouses. This is a declaration of war. I have to go. He was already moving toward the exit. Sarah returned to work, going through the motions as she tried to process everything. She'd gotten a glimpse into Dante's world. When the event ended at midnight, Sarah changed and stepped outside to see one of Dante's SUVs waiting for her with his head of security at the wheel. Ms. Mitchell. Sarah wanted to argue about the protection, but Marco, I could see it in your eyes if I ever chose violence over restraint. He just shook his head, a little dumbfounded. You're changing me, Sarah. You're making me question things that I've accepted as absolute truths my entire life. Is that even a good thing? He looked genuinely conflicted. I don't know yet. His smile was sad. What I do know is that these past 4 days without talking to you have been the longest of my life. I must have reached for my phone 100 times, just wanting to hear your voice, needing to know that you were safe. But I also knew that until the situation with Russo was resolved, any contact with you would only put you in even more danger. I was worried about you too. You really shouldn't be. I can handle guys like Russo. I've been handling them my whole life. Dante's expression turned deadly serious. But Sarah, I need you to truly understand what being with me really means. This situation with Russo. It won't be the last threat. There will always be someone ambitious, someone who wants what the Moretti family has, someone who will look for weaknesses to exploit. And you, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you're a weakness. You're the only thing that matters to me anymore. The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tighten with a confusing mix of emotions, which, yes, makes you a vulnerability in a world where showing even a hint of vulnerability can be fatal. Sarah was quiet for what felt like a very long time, trying to fully process what he was really saying. You're trying to push me away, again, for my own good. I'm trying to give you all the information, everything you need so that you can make an informed choice. Dante's grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. I won't lie to you, Sarah. Being with me comes with risks, constant security details, severely limited privacy, always wondering if someone is watching you, just waiting for any opportunity to strike. It's not the normal life that you deserve. He paused, searching her face. And if I choose that life anyway, risks and all. A flicker of hope, almost imperceptible, ignited in his dark eyes, only to be quickly suppressed. Then I'd spend every single day trying to be worthy of that choice, trying to be more of the man that you see and less of the monster that everyone else fears. You're not a monster, Dante. I've done monstrous things to protect my family, to survive in the world that I was born into. Sarah leaned forward, her blue eyes intense and unwavering. I'm not naive enough to think that you're some misunderstood hero, but I also don't think that you're beyond redemption, beyond change. Sarah, his voice cracked, just barely. I've been thinking about this for 4 days straight, about what I want, what I'm willing to risk. She took a deep, steadying breath. I choose you, Dante. All of you. The part that's dangerous and the part that's gentle. The crime lord and the man who can't sleep without hearing my voice. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. Her voice was firm, resolute. I'm choosing to walk into this with my eyes wide open, to accept the risks, because the alternative, living without you, feels worse than any danger that your world could possibly present. Dante stood abruptly, pulling her up with him. Before Sarah could even begin to process what was happening, his hands were framing her face, and his lips crashed against hers in a kiss that was equal parts desperation and reverence. Sarah gasped softly against his mouth, and Dante immediately took advantage, deepening the kiss with an intensity that made her knees feel like they might buckle at any moment. His arms wrapped tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against him, and Sarah's hands fisted in his shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in her suddenly spinning world. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "I love you." The words just tumbled out, raw and vulnerable, like a confession he couldn't hold back any longer. "I know it's too soon. I know I shouldn't feel this strongly this fast, but Sarah, I love you. You've become essential to me in a way that I honestly didn't think was possible." "I love you too." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm terrified and exhilarated and completely out of my depth. But I love you." Dante pulled back just enough to really look at her, his expression completely transformed. The exhaustion was still there, the shadows still lingered under his eyes, but now there was also something new, something that looked a lot like joy. "Come home with me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not for anything. I just want you close. I want to fall asleep knowing that you're safe." Sarah just nodded, beyond words. The drive to Dante's penthouse was silent, his hand never leaving hers in the back of the SUV. His security team followed at a discreet distance, and Sarah tried her best not to dwell on the fact that she needed armed guards just to visit her boyfriend's home. The penthouse was everything Sarah had expected, and yet nothing like she'd imagined. Yes, there was definitely luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city, furniture that probably cost more than her entire yearly tuition, art on the walls that very well might have been original masterpieces. But there were also unexpected details, small things that revealed the man beneath the title, beneath the carefully constructed facade. Books everywhere, dog-eared and well-read. A telescope pointed towards the night sky. Framed photos of a woman who had to be his mother, her smile warm and genuine. A guitar in the corner, worn from frequent use. "You play?" Sarah gestured towards the instrument. "Used to," Dante said with a shrug. "Before, everything else took priority. You should start again." "Maybe I will." He pulled her into his arms, just holding her close. "Stay with me tonight." He paused, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Every night, move in here, where I know you're protected." "Dante, I can't just—" "I know," he said quickly. "Too fast, too much." He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "But promise me you'll think about it, about making this permanent." Sarah pulled back just enough to look at him, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. "Permanent as in living together, or permanent as in something more?" "All of it." Dante's expression was fierce, possessive, and completely vulnerable all at once. "I want everything with you, Sarah, the whole impossible future. But I'll take whatever you're willing to give, and I'll be grateful for it." "Ask me again," she whispered, her heart racing. "In a few months, when we've had some time to navigate all of this together, when I've finished school, and you've had more time to restructure your business into something legitimate." "You want me to go legitimate?" "I want you to have options." Sarah's hand rested over his heart. To build something that isn't dependent on fear and violence. I think you're capable of that. I think you want that." Dante was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on hers. "I've been thinking about it. About what my life could look like if I actually stepped back from the family business. Appointed someone else to handle the day-to-day operations while I focus on our legal enterprises." "You have legal enterprises," Sarah said, surprised. "Real estate, investments, a few restaurants." He managed a self-deprecating smile.
"Turns out I'm actually pretty good at legitimate business when I actually apply myself. I just never really had a reason to before. And now—" He paused, his eyes locking with hers. "Now I have the best reason in the world." He kissed her softly, tenderly. "You." They spent the rest of the night on his couch, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about everything and nothing. Dante told her about his mother, who had died when he was just 15 years old from cancer, the very same disease that Sarah wanted to help children fight. Sarah told him about her parents, about the scholarship that had made nursing school even remotely possible, about her dreams of making a real difference in the world. As the city lights glittered far below them and dawn began to paint the sky a delicate shade of pink, Sarah realized that she'd never felt safer or more certain about anything in her entire life. This was dangerous, yes, this was complicated, definitely. This was going to require sacrifices and compromises from both of them, without a doubt. But it was also real, and it was worth fighting for. Dante's phone buzzed insistently around 6 in the morning. He answered it with obvious reluctance, his arms still wrapped tightly around Sarah. "What is it, Marcus?" He listened for a moment, his expression hardening with each passing second. "When I see him, handle it the way that we discussed, the new way." He glanced at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and something else, something softer. "Because things are different now. We're different." When he finally hung up, Sarah raised a questioning eyebrow. "Problem?" "Someone testing our boundaries, seeing if my handling of Rousseau means that I've gone soft." Dante's smile was predatory, but there was a new kind of restraint there too. "Marcus is going to demonstrate that restraint isn't weakness, that we can handle threats without automatically defaulting to violence." "I'm proud of you," Sarah said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Don't be proud yet," he cautioned. "This is harder than you know. Every single instinct I have is fighting against it." His expression grew serious, almost pained. "But I meant what I said. I'm trying to be better for you, for us, for the future. I want to build something more." Sarah kissed him, slow and deep, pouring all of her hope and belief into that one touch. "Then we'll build it together." 6 weeks later, Sarah stood in Dante's home office, watching him conduct a business meeting via video conference. He was negotiating the sale of several properties, his business acumen on full display as he navigated complex financial discussions with the ease of someone who'd clearly been doing this his entire life. This was the legitimate side of his empire, the part he was systematically expanding while slowly extracting himself from the family's traditional, much darker operations. It wasn't easy. Old loyalties and deeply ingrained expectations fought against every single change. But Dante was stubborn, and with Sarah's unwavering support, he was actively reshaping what it truly meant to be a Moretti. The meeting finally ended, and Dante leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression on his face.
That's the Harbour District development locked down. Completely legal, completely clean. I'm impressed. Sarah moved to stand behind him, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. How much of the business is legitimate now? About 40%, he said, tilting his head back to look at her. Another year, and I think I can get it to 70, maybe even higher. And the rest being transferred to trusted people who actually understand that things are changing, that the Moretti family is moving in a completely new direction. His hand reached up to cover hers, his touch warm and reassuring. It's slow, and it's frustrating, but it's working. Sarah had officially moved into the penthouse 3 weeks ago, her small apartment packed up and left behind. Nursing school was incredibly demanding, but Dante had converted one of his spare rooms into a dedicated study space for her, complete with all of the necessary medical textbooks and a state-of-the-art computer system. Her finals were in just 2 weeks. After that, she'd officially graduate and begin her residency at Children's Memorial Hospital, a coveted position that had absolutely nothing to do with Dante's influence and everything to do with her stellar academic record and her passionate, heartfelt interview. Life had somehow settled into an unexpected, almost surreal rhythm. Sarah studied and attended classes, while Dante rebuilt his empire into something that could ultimately survive without fear as its very foundation. They had dinner together every single night that it was even remotely possible, and they shared long, meaningful conversations about their days, their dreams, their shared future. The security was still there, of course. Guards at the building entrance, extensive background checks on anyone who even came near Sarah, armored vehicles for transportation. But she'd grown accustomed to it, understanding that this was simply the price of loving Dante Moretti. "I have something for you," Dante said, standing up and pulling a small velvet box from his desk drawer. Sarah's heart nearly stopped beating. "Dante, it's not what you think, is it?" His smile was gentle and reassuring. "Not yet." "I promised that I would wait until you finished school." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a small, intricately designed pendant. A lion, the unmistakable symbol of the Moretti family, but rendered in elegant, understated lines. "It's beautiful." "It's protection," Dante said, his expression growing serious. "Everyone in our world knows this symbol. Wearing it means that you're under Moretti protection, that hurting you means declaring war on my entire family." Sarah understood the immense significance of what he was offering. This wasn't just jewelry. It was a bold statement to everyone in his world that she was his, and therefore untouchable. "Will you wear it?" Dante's voice actually held a hint of uncertainty, as if he genuinely feared that she might refuse. "Yes," Sarah said, without hesitation. She turned, lifting her hair so that he could fasten the clasp. The pendant settled against her skin, warm and surprisingly comfortable. When she turned back, Dante's expression was fierce. "I know that I said I'd wait to ask the big questions, but Sarah, I need you to know that when you graduate, when you're ready, I'm going to ask you to marry me. And I really, really hope that you'll say yes." "I hope so too," she whispered, her voice soft but absolutely certain. Dante pulled her into his arms, and Sarah melted against him, marveling at how natural this had all become. Just 6 short weeks ago, she had been absolutely terrified of this world, of what it really meant to love someone like Dante. Now, she honestly couldn't even imagine her life without him. His phone buzzed, shattering the moment. Dante glanced at the screen and swore softly under his breath. "What is it?" "It's Marco Russo." His jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a familiar anger. Apparently, exile and federal investigations weren't quite enough to keep him quiet. He's been talking to the press, making all sorts of wild accusations about the family's business practices. Can he prove anything? No. But he doesn't really need to. Rumors and suspicion can be just as damaging as facts, sometimes even more so. Dante set the phone down, his expression calculating. I need to handle this before it becomes a real problem. How? The old me would have silenced him, permanently. Dante's hand found hers, his fingers interlacing with hers. The new me is going to fight him in court, with lawyers and legal documents instead of threats. That's terrifying, weak, completely against everything that I was ever taught. Dante's laugh was self-deprecating. Yeah, but it's also the right thing to do, the legal thing, the thing that doesn't risk everything that I'm trying so desperately to build. Sarah kissed him, feeling proud and terrified in equal measure. When do you meet with the lawyers? Tomorrow morning. He pulled her closer, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Want to come with me? See just how incredibly boring legitimate business can actually be. I have class. Skip it. Just this once. His smile was teasing. Live dangerously. I'm dating you. I live dangerously every single day. They spent the rest of the evening out on the balcony, watching the sun slowly set over the very city that Dante had once controlled through fear and now sought to influence through legitimate means. Sarah quizzed him on the harbour district development while he helped her memorize medication dosages for her upcoming exam. It was domestic, it was normal. It was exactly the kind of life that Sarah had thought was utterly impossible just 6 weeks ago. Do you miss it? Sarah asked quietly as darkness finally fell. The power, the fear, being the person that everyone was afraid to cross. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the city lights. Sometimes, when I'm in a meeting and someone actually pushes back, my first instinct is still to just remind them who I am, what I'm truly capable of. He turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions. But then I think about coming home to you, about building something that isn't dependent on violence, and I realize that I don't actually miss it as much as I thought I would. What do you miss? The certainty. When you rule through fear, everything is very clear-cut. You know exactly where you stand, what your options are. His hand found hers, his thumb gently tracing circles on her palm. This new way, legitimacy, legal battles, playing by society's rules, it's messier, it's slower, it's far more uncertain, but it's worth it. He looked at her, his eyes filled with an intensity that took her breath away. If it means that I get to keep you, if it means that I can build a life where our children don't inherit a legacy of violence and fear. Dante's smile was soft, almost hesitant. Then yes, absolutely worth it. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Children? Eventually, if you even want them, he said quickly, his thumb still tracing those small, comforting circles on her palm. I think about it sometimes, what our kids would be like if they had your courage and your kindness. If I could be the kind of father who teaches them to be strong without ever being cruel. You would be, Sarah said, her voice filled with absolute certainty. You're already learning how to be strong in completely different ways. The next morning, Sarah actually did skip class to accompany Dante to his lawyer's office. She sat quietly in the corner while expensive attorneys in even more expensive suits discussed strategy for combating Russo's allegations, discovery motions, depositions, litigation timelines. It was, just as Dante had promised, monumentally boring. But it was also legitimate, it was legal, and it was exactly the kind of battle that was fought in courtrooms instead of dark back alleys. Sarah caught Dante's eye from across the conference room, and his expression softened, just for a moment. "This is for you," his look said. "All of this, the lawyers, the legitimate business, the slow and painstaking extraction from my family's traditional operations, it's all because you've made me want to be better." When the meeting finally ended, Dante escorted her back to the penthouse, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. "That was excruciating," he said once they were alone. "But effective? The lawyers seem to think so. They're confident that they can not only shut down Russo's baseless accusations, but potentially even pursue defamation charges." Dante pulled her into his arms, holding her close. 6 months ago, I would have solved this entire problem in about 3 hours with a single phone call and a few well-placed implicit threats. Now, it's going to take 6 months of incredibly tedious legal maneuvering. "Progress is rarely quick," Sarah said, smiling softly. "No," he agreed, resting his forehead against hers. "But it's the right kind of progress. The kind that doesn't compromise what we're building together." That night, as they lay tangled together in Dante's massive bed, Sarah felt a sense of contentment that she had honestly never experienced before in her entire life. This was home, this complicated, dangerous, evolving relationship with a man who was literally trying to rewrite his entire life simply because she'd looked at him and seen the potential for goodness. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you more," Dante said, his arms tightening around her. "You saved me, Sarah, from becoming the kind of man that my reputation suggested I already was." "You saved yourself," she countered softly. "I just gave you a reason to try." 2 weeks later, Sarah walked across the stage at her nursing school graduation, her worn red apron long since retired in favor of scrubs and a crisp white coat. In the audience, Dante sat proudly in the very front row, his expression fierce and proud and completely transformed from the cold, ruthless crime lord who had yelled at her about Valentinos and V just 6 short months ago. After the ceremony, he swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite the large crowd of graduates and their excited families. "I'm so incredibly proud of you," he murmured against her hair. "Thank you for—" Sarah struggled for the right words. "For everything. For the unwavering support, for giving me the space that I needed to focus on school, for just being patient." "I'd wait forever for you," Dante said, setting her back down on her feet, his hands framing her face. "But I'm really hoping that I won't have to wait much longer." Before Sarah could even ask what he meant by that, Dante dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the crowded graduation hall, pulling out a small velvet box that held a ring, an emerald surrounded by a halo of sparkling diamonds. Vintage and elegant and absolutely perfect. "Sarah Mitchell," he began, his voice strong and clear, carrying across the suddenly silent hall. "6 months ago, you looked me directly in the eye and refused to be intimidated. You saw past my reputation, past all the lies and the fear, to the man underneath. You made me want to be better, to build something legitimate and good. You changed my entire world with just 3 simple words. You don't own me. And you were right. I don't own you, but I'm really hoping that you'll choose to be mine anyway. Will you marry me? Sarah dropped to her knees right there in front of him, tears streaming freely down her face. Yes, God, yes. Dante slid the ring onto her finger, and the entire graduation hall erupted in thunderous applause. He kissed her like they were the only 2 people in the entire world, and Sarah kissed him back with equal fervor, tasting the salt from their mingled tears. This was the man that she had chosen. The dangerous crime lord who was slowly but surely becoming something better. The feared Moretti heir who had finally learned that true strength actually meant restraint. The lonely, isolated man who had finally found someone brave enough to challenge him, to truly see him. When they finally broke apart, Dante rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning this, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. Earning you? You already have, Sarah said fiercely. Now we just get to build our future together. And as the crowd pressed in around them with a flurry of excited congratulations and curious questions, as her classmates gaped openly at the stunning ring and Dante's incredibly efficient bodyguards managed the chaos with effortless professional efficiency, Sarah realized that just 6 months ago she had simply walked into Valentino's expecting a perfectly normal shift serving tables. Instead, she'd somehow found the love of her entire life in the last place that she would have ever expected to find it. In the dark, intense eyes of a man that everyone else feared, a man who had simply needed someone brave enough to see his humanity beneath the monster that everyone else saw. 1 year later, Sarah stood in front of the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom, or rather, the bedroom that Dante had meticulously recreated based on her detailed descriptions and the few surviving photos that she had from before her parents' tragic deaths. He'd wanted her to have a space that felt like home, a sanctuary as she prepared for their wedding. The dress itself was simple elegance, ivory silk that draped perfectly against her figure, with delicate lace detailing at the shoulders and a train that whispered softly across the hardwood floor. Her light brown hair was styled in soft, romantic waves, partially pinned up with small, delicate flowers woven throughout. The Moretti lion pendant rested against her skin, a familiar and comforting weight. You look absolutely beautiful, Marco, her former co-worker and now close friend, said, standing in the doorway with tears welling up in his eyes. Like a princess. A princess who can totally handle herself around crime lords, but still, Sarah laughed, a nervous flutter in her stomach. Former crime lord, mostly. It was true. Over the course of the past year, Dante had systematically dismantled and completely rebuilt the Moretti Empire into something almost entirely legitimate. The family still had influence, and they still commanded a great deal of respect, but now it came from sharp business acumen and strategic investments rather than fear and implicit threats. The transition hadn't exactly been easy. Some of the old guard had definitely resisted, stubbornly clinging to the traditional ways. A few had even left the organization entirely. But Dante had remained firm, unwavering in his commitment, supported by Sarah and their shared vision of what his family could ultimately become. He now ran one of the city's most successful real estate development companies, with completely legitimate holdings across 3 different states. The lawyers had successfully fought off Marco Russo's baseless allegations, and Russo himself was currently serving time for tax evasion brought down by his own illegal activities rather than Moretti retaliation. It was, Sarah reflected, exactly the kind of justice that Dante had been slowly but surely learning to embrace. Slow, legal, but ultimately far more effective. "The car is ready whenever you are," Marco said, breaking through her thoughts. "Though I should probably warn you, there are about 200 people downstairs waiting to see you." Sarah's stomach did a nervous flip. The guest list had been a negotiation. Old family associates who needed to witness that the Moretti heir was truly settling down. Sarah's nursing school friends who were still slightly terrified of Dante, and a carefully curated mix of business colleagues from Dante's perfectly legitimate enterprises. "How does he look?" Sarah couldn't help asking, her voice barely a whisper. Marco grinned. "Like a man who still can't quite believe his luck. He's been pacing for the last hour, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Sarah gathered her bouquet, a delicate arrangement of white roses and soft greenery, and took a deep, steadying breath. This was it, the moment that made everything official, that declared loudly and clearly to both Dante's world and hers that they were choosing this impossible love despite all of the obstacles. The venue, of course, was the very same upscale restaurant where they had first met, Valentino's. Antonio had insisted, saying that it would be an absolute honor to host the wedding of the man who had become one of their most loyal patrons and the fearless waitress who had ultimately changed his entire life. The corner booth, where they had had their very first confrontation, had been intentionally removed to create space for the ceremony. Sarah appreciated the symbolism, removing the old to make room for the new. As she walked slowly down the makeshift aisle between the rows of chairs, past faces that were both familiar and undeniably intimidating, Sarah's eyes immediately found Dante at the front. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair styled back impeccably, his expression a captivating mix of awe and fierce possessiveness that made her breath catch in her throat. But when she finally reached him and he took her hands in his, Sarah saw something else entirely reflected in his eyes: vulnerability. Like even now, even after everything they'd been through, he still couldn't quite believe that she had truly chosen him. "You're stunning," he whispered as the officiant began to speak. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she whispered back, a small smile playing on her lips. The ceremony itself was traditional, their vows a blend of standard promises and deeply personal additions. When it finally came time for Dante to read his vows, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. His voice, though steady, was thick with emotion at the 1:18:21. "Sarah," he began, "a year and a half ago, you looked me straight in the eye and refused to be intimidated. You saw something in me, a spark that I'd completely forgotten existed. The capacity for goodness, for real change, for becoming something more than just my worst impulses. You challenged me, pushed me to actually be better, and then, incredibly, you stood right by my side while I struggled to even figure out what better even meant." His hands tightened ever so gently on hers. "I promise you, Sarah, I promise to spend every single day earning your love, choosing restraint and control over knee-jerk reactions, choosing what's legitimate and right over what's simply expedient, and choosing us, our relationship, over absolutely everything else. You are my salvation," he continued, his voice filled with raw emotion at 01:18:58. "My conscience and truly my greatest blessing. I will protect you, cherish you, and love you until the very last breath I take." Sarah's vows were simpler in their wording, but certainly no less heartfelt. "Dante," she said, her eyes locked on his, "you taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, not at all. It's about making the conscious decision to move forward despite it, to keep going even when you're terrified. You showed me that people really can change, that redemption is actually possible, and that love, true love, can transform even the darkest and most difficult situations into something truly beautiful and extraordinary. I choose you, Dante, all of you, every single day for the rest of our lives." When the officiant at 01/19/32 finally pronounced them husband and wife, Dante kissed her with a surprising gentleness that completely belied his powerful and intimidating reputation. The entire restaurant just erupted in applause. Old family associates were sitting right next to nursing school graduates, two completely different worlds colliding in joyous celebration. The reception itself was a real study in contrasts. Traditional Italian music seamlessly mixed with contemporary hits. Expensive champagne flowed freely right alongside locally brewed craft beer. Dante's bodyguards, still ever present despite everything, were chatting amicably with Sarah's former professors. During their first dance as husband and wife, Dante pulled Sarah close to him, his hand gently spanning the small of her back. "How are you holding up through all of this?" he murmured softly against her hair. "It's surreal, isn't it?" "Good surreal, though," she confirmed, looking up at him with a smile. "A year and a half ago, I was serving you wine and secretly planning my elaborate escape from your table. And now, here we are, married. It's honestly the best decision I've ever made in my entire life, except maybe being rude about that veil. Definitely worst decision. It initially made me think you were just a spoiled, entitled jerk." "I was an entitled jerk," Dante admitted, his smile somewhat self-deprecating. "I was just better at hiding it from everyone else at that point in my life. And now," he continued, a playful glint in his eyes at 01/20/39. "Now I'm your entitled jerk exclusively." Sarah laughed wholeheartedly, and Dante spun her gracefully across the dance floor with practiced ease. When the song finally ended, Antonio approached them with a bottle of wine. It was the very same vintage that Dante had been drinking the night they first met. "Compliments of the house," Antonio said, his eyes misting over with emotion. "I honestly never thought I'd live to see the day when the fearsome Mr. Moretti looked this genuinely happy." "Neither did I," Dante admitted readily, pulling Sarah closer against his side. "But she has a way of making seemingly impossible things seem not only possible, but actually achievable." The party continued late into the night at 01/21/16. Sarah's feet ached terribly from all the dancing. Her face hurt from smiling so much, but she had honestly never felt happier in her entire life. As the evening began to wind down, Dante whisked her away to the penthouse, which was now officially their shared home, though Sarah had absolutely insisted on keeping some of her old, more familiar furniture mixed in with his much more expensive pieces. "Finally, we're alone," Dante sighed contentedly, loosening his tie as they stepped into the elevator. "Not that I didn't absolutely love the party, but you've been wanting to get me alone all day, since the very moment I first saw you in that dress at 01/21/49. Sarah finished for him, a knowing smile playing on her lips. His eyes darkened with undisguised heat. "Do you have any idea how incredibly difficult it was to maintain any semblance of composure during the entire ceremony? All I could think about was this very moment. The elevator doors opened to reveal their penthouse, and without another word, Dante swept Sarah up into his arms, carrying her across the threshold, despite her laughing protests. "This is so totally cliché," she giggled. "Just let me have my moment, okay?" He sat her down very gently in their bedroom, his hands framing her face with tenderness. "Sarah Moretti, my wife," he said, savouring the sound of the words. "Dante Moretti, my husband," she echoed, equally pleased. She paused, letting the reality of it all sink in. "We really did this. We actually built something real and lasting from that disastrous first meeting at 001-22-26. "Best disaster of my life," Dante agreed readily, kissing her softly. "Thank you for seeing past the reputation, for giving me a chance to actually be better." "Thank you for being brave enough to change," Sarah replied, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, "for choosing us over everything else." They made love that night with a tenderness and a passion that came from truly and deeply knowing each other, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Every scar, every fear, every dream was laid bare and shared between them at 01-23-01. Afterwards, wrapped securely in each other's arms as the city lights glittered far below them, Sarah felt a profound sense of contentment that she'd honestly never even imagined was possible. "What are you thinking about?" Dante's voice was drowsy, his hand tracing lazy, soothing patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Sarah murmured, snuggling even closer. "That we somehow found each other despite impossible odds. That our whole story started with me being brave for just 30 seconds, and it completely changed everything." "3 words," Dante murmured sleepily. "You don't own me." "Best 3 words ever spoken to me," Sarah agreed. "I love you are pretty good too, though." "Yeah," he agreed, his arms tightening around her. "Those are even better." They fell asleep like that, Sarah's head resting comfortably on Dante's chest, his heartbeat a steady, reassuring rhythm beneath her ear. Outside, the ever-vigilant security guards maintained their posts. The legitimate business empire required constant management, and the world continued turning, relentlessly moving forward. But inside their penthouse, 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely and improbable of circumstances slept peacefully, secure in the unwavering knowledge that they'd chosen each other against all imaginable odds at 01-24-09. 5 years later, Sarah would stand in the pediatric oncology ward of Children's Memorial Hospital, holding the trembling hand of a scared 6-year-old child starting chemotherapy. She'd be wearing scrubs instead of her old red apron, a wedding ring instead of crippling nervousness, and her security detail would wait discreetly but attentively in the hallway. Dante would text her throughout the day, sometimes about pressing business decisions, sometimes just to simply say that he missed her terribly, always signing off with, "I love you," at 01-24-40. They'd have a daughter by then, 3 years old, with her mother's light brown hair and her father's piercing dark eyes. A daughter who would grow up knowing about her father's past, but seeing primarily his present, the man he had become, the man who ran legitimate businesses, donated generously and consistently to children's hospitals, and taught her that true strength meant protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them for personal gain. But on their wedding night, none of that was certain yet. All they had was each other, their seemingly impossible love, and the unwavering commitment to build a life worthy of the profound transformation they'd both undergone at 01-25-10. Sarah drifted off to sleep, thinking about those 3 simple words that had started absolutely everything. 3 words that had somehow made a feared and ruthless crime lord stop in his tracks and seriously reconsider his entire life. 3 words that had given her the courage to stand her ground when everything logical and reasonable said to run as far and as fast as she possibly could. "You don't own me." But somewhere along the winding and often difficult process of falling deeply in love, they'd both learned that ownership was never really the point at all. Partnership was. Choosing each other every single day, despite all the inevitable complications and the inherent risks and the significant transformation required from both of them at 01/25/42. And as the city slept soundly, and dawn prepared to paint the sky with its vibrant colors, Sarah Mitchell Moretti smiled contentedly against her husband's strong chest, overwhelmingly grateful for every single moment that had led to this one. From a determined waitress who absolutely refused to back down to the devoted wife of a reformed crime lord, from 3 simple words of defiance to a lifetime filled with love. It was, she reflected with a quiet sense of wonder, exactly the kind of completely impossible and far-fetched story she would have scoffed at and laughed at just 18 months ago. But now it was her reality, her beautiful, complicated, and undeniably hard-won reality at 01/26/17, and she wouldn't change a single moment of it for anything in the entire world.